The crash landing. It was a quiet night on the remote planet Sinara, where the human settlers lived under a sky full of stars. The air was still, and the only sounds were the distant hum of generators and the occasional chirping of the native wildlife. Most people were asleep, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. Suddenly, the silence was shattered by a deafening roar from the sky. A blazing object streaked across the heavens, leaving a fiery trail behind it. The settlers rushed out of their homes, their faces lit by the glow of the falling object. Some thought it was a meteor, others feared it was something worse. The object crashed into the barren plains just outside the settlement, shaking the ground like an earthquake. A plume of smoke and fire rose into the air, and the settlers hesitated, unsure of what to do. Curiosity and fear battled in their minds. Ethan, a man in his late 30s with sharp eyes and a rugged face, stood among the crowd. Unlike the others, he didn't hesitate. His military instincts kicked in. Grabbing a flashlight and a worn-out jacket, he headed toward the crash site, ignoring the murmurs and warnings of his neighbors. "Ethan, don't go. It could be dangerous." An elderly woman called out. "I'll be fine," he replied, his voice calm but firm. He didn't know why, but something told him this was important. When Ethan reached the crash site, the heat was intense. The ground was scorched black, and pieces of metal were scattered everywhere. In the center of the wreckage lay what appeared to be an escape pod, its surface dented and smoking. The pod's hatch hissed as it slowly opened, releasing a puff of steam. Ethan instinctively reached for the small knife he always carried. He wasn't sure what to expect. Was it a machine, a weapon, or something alive? From the pod emerged a figure, a tall, slender alien woman with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer under the moonlight. Her large, luminous eyes scanned the area, filled with a mix of fear and determination. She was holding two smaller figures close to her, a boy and a girl, no older than 10 in human years. Their small hands clung to her as if she were their only shield against the hostile world. Ethan froze. He had heard stories about the Nixians, a race feared and hated across the galaxy. But this wasn't what he expected. The woman looked fragile, her movements slow and careful. She was injured, a deep gash on her arm dripping dark blue blood. The children looked terrified, their eyes darting around for danger. The alien woman tried to speak, her voice soft and musical, but the words were in a language Ethan didn't understand. She gestured toward her arm, then toward her children, clearly asking for help. Before Ethan could respond, the sound of angry voices and footsteps grew louder. The settlers had followed him, armed with crude weapons, sticks, pipes, and old blasters. "It's a Nixian," one of them shouted. "They're dangerous. Get rid of them before they attack us." The crowd closed in, their faces twisted with fear and anger. The alien woman stepped back, shielding her children, her glowing eyes wide with panic. "Wait," Ethan yelled, stepping between the settlers and the aliens. "They're not a threat. Look at them. They're injured, and they have kids." "Move aside, Ethan," another man growled. "You don't know what they're capable of. They could kill us all." Ethan stood his ground. "They're scared. They need help, not violence." The settlers hesitated, their weapons still raised. The tension was thick, like a string pulled too tight, ready to snap. Suddenly, one of the children made a sound, a soft, trembling whimper that broke through the hostility. The girl clung to her mother, her small body shaking with fear. It was a sound so universal, so human, that even the angriest among the settlers faltered. "They're just kids," Ethan said, his voice softer now. "Are we really the kind of people who hurt children? Is this who we've become?" The settlers exchanged uneasy glances. Their anger was slowly giving way to doubt, but fear still lingered. "Fine," the man growled again. "But if they cause any trouble, it's on you, Ethan. Don't expect us to clean up your mess." The crowd began to disperse, grumbling and muttering among themselves. Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He turned back to the alien woman and her children. "Come with me," he said gently, gesturing toward his small house on the outskirts of the settlement. "You'll be safe there." The woman hesitated, her glowing eyes studying him carefully. Then, with a slight nod, she took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong despite her injuries. The children followed, their small hands clutching their mother's tattered clothing. As they walked away from the wreckage, Ethan couldn't help but wonder, who were they running from? And why had they come here? The answers, he knew, would change everything. Ethan's struggle. The dim glow of the morning sun crept through the cracks in Ethan's small rundown house. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Tyra, the alien mother, sat silently on the edge of a worn-out couch, her luminous blue eyes watching her children as they slept. The boy and girl huddled together under an old blanket, their faces calm but weary. Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his thoughts racing. What had he gotten himself into? He had spent years trying to escape the chaos of the galaxy, only to find it knocking on his doorstep. He studied Syra from the corner of his eye. Her pale blue skin shimmered faintly, and the deep gash on her arm had stopped bleeding, but still looked painful. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, breaking the silence. Syra looked up, her expression unreadable. She opened her mouth to speak but hesitated, as if choosing her words carefully. "Thank you," she said at last, her voice soft but accented. She struggled with the words, clearly unfamiliar with the human language. Ethan nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He didn't trust easily, and this situation reeked of trouble. The Nixlians were outcasts, despised by humans and most other species. Yet here he was, risking everything to protect them. "Why were they chasing you?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Zira hesitated, glancing at her children. She seemed to weigh her options before speaking. "We escaped," she said slowly, "from a place where we were not free." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "That's vague." Syra's gaze hardened, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "I cannot say more. Not yet." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his messy hair. He wasn't surprised. Secrets were common in his line of work, or his old line of work, back when he was a soldier. But secrets had a way of exploding when you least expected them. "I need more than that," he said. "If I'm going to stick my neck out for you, I need to know what I'm up against." Syra looked away, her jaw tightening. "If I tell you, you will wish you hadn't helped us." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine, but he pushed it aside. He wasn't a stranger to danger. Whatever this was, he could handle it, or so he told himself. The sound of footsteps outside made him freeze. He motioned for Syra to stay quiet and grabbed the old rifle he kept by the door. Peering through the curtain, he saw a small group of settlers lingering near his property. "They're watching us," Ethan muttered. Syra tensed, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch. "Will they attack?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet. They're scared, but fear can turn into violence real fast." He stepped outside, keeping his rifle slung casually over his shoulder. The settlers turned to face him, their expressions a mix of suspicion and hostility. "We know they're in there, Ethan," one of them said. It was Marcus, a burly man with a deep voice and an even deeper grudge against anything alien. "You can't hide them forever." "I'm not hiding anyone," Ethan replied, his tone calm but firm. "I'm helping someone who needs it." "They're dangerous," Marcus shot back. "You've seen what their kind can do. They'll stab you in the back the moment they get the chance." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "Have they done anything to you? Have they hurt anyone here?" Marcus hesitated but didn't back down. "Not yet, but it's only a matter of time." Ethan sighed, his patience wearing thin. "If you're so sure they're a threat, then let the patrol handle it. But until they show up, you stay off my property." "Got it." Marcus glared at him, but eventually turned and walked away, muttering under his breath. The others followed, though their suspicious glances lingered. When Ethan went back inside, Syra was standing by the window, her face pale. "They hate us," she said quietly. Ethan shrugged. "They hate anything they don't understand." Syra's eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a spark of gratitude in her gaze. "You understand," she said. Ethan shook his head. "No, I don't. But I know what it's like to be hunted, to have no one to trust." He set the rifle down and sat across from her. "You need to tell me the truth, Syra. What's really going on? Why were you running?" Syra took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly. "They want what I carry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you carry?" Ethan asked, leaning forward. She hesitated before reaching into her bag and pulling out a small metallic object. It was sleek and oval-shaped, with glowing symbols etched into its surface. Ethan didn't recognize it, but he could tell it was something powerful and dangerous. "This," she said, "is why they will not stop. This is why we cannot be found." Ethan stared at the object, a sinking feeling settling in his gut. He didn't know what it was, but he knew one thing for sure. His quiet life was over. "Great," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "Just what I needed." Outside, the patrol drone buzzed over the settlement, its red light scanning the area. The hunt had already begun. The mother's secret. The evening air in Zenera was unusually still, as if the planet itself were holding its breath. Inside Ethan's small home, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. The alien artifact Syra had revealed sat on the table between them, its glowing symbols casting an eerie light that danced across the walls. Ethan stared at the object, his mind racing. It was unlike anything he'd seen during his time as a soldier, and that alone was enough to set him on edge. "You need to start explaining," he said, his voice low but firm. "What is it, and why is it worth risking your life?" Syra hesitated, her hands resting protectively on the table, as if shielding the artifact from his gaze. Her glowing eyes flickered with a mix of fear and determination. "It is a piece of our history," she said slowly, her voice careful. "But it is also a weapon." Ethan's stomach tightened. "A weapon? That doesn't exactly help your case. It is not meant to destroy," she added quickly. "At least, not in the way you think. It is technology that can alter life itself. It can heal, create, or—" She trailed off, her expression darkening. "Or it can destroy entire worlds if used with the wrong intent." Ethan leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words pressing down on him. "And I'm guessing someone wants it for the latter." Syra nodded. "The Galactic Authority. They control most of the galaxy, but they fear what they cannot control. They wanted to use this artifact to subjugate my people, to strip us of what makes us who we are. When I refused to give it to them, they declared us enemies of the state." "Enemies of the state," Ethan repeated, his tone sharp. "So what, you were a scientist or something?" "A scientist, yes," Syra admitted. "And a mother. I created this artifact to help my people survive, to heal our planet. But they twisted its purpose and turned it into a reason to hunt us." Ethan rubbed his temples, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "So you ran." "I had no choice," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "They killed anyone who stood in their way. My children and I escaped in a stolen ship, but they followed us. The crash brought us here." Ethan glanced at the children, who were asleep on a makeshift bed in the corner of the room. Their faces were peaceful now, but he could see the faint glow beneath their skin, a sign of their Nixlian heritage. "And what about them?" he asked. "Are they normal?" Syra's gaze softened as she looked at her children. "They are special. The artifact, it has changed them, enhanced them. They are not like other Nixlians anymore." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, enhanced?" "They can sense things," Syra explained. "Emotions, intentions, sometimes even glimpses of the future. But it's not just their minds. Their bodies are stronger, faster. It's as if the artifact has awakened something dormant in them. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen his share of enhanced beings during the war. Soldiers modified to be faster, deadlier. But this was different. These were children, not weapons. And you think the Galactic Authority knows about this? They suspect, Tyra said, which is why they won't stop until they find us. The room fell silent, the weight of her story settling over them. Ethan stood and began pacing, his mind working through the implications. He had taken in a family on the run, a fugitive scientist, and a mysterious artifact that could reshape the galaxy. And now, they were being hunted by the most powerful force in the known universe. "You've put me in a hell of a position," he said finally, his tone a mix of frustration and resignation. "I didn't ask for your help," Thyra replied, her voice calm but firm. "You chose to save us." Ethan stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Yeah, I did. And now I have to figure out how to keep all of us alive." At that moment, a soft peeping noise echoed through the room. Thyra's eyes widened as she looked at the artifact. Its glowing symbols began to pulse rhythmically, casting bright flashes of light. Ethan instinctively reached for his rifle. "What's it doing?" "It's reacting," Thyra said, her voice tense. "Someone is close. They're scanning for it." Ethan cursed under his breath. "The patrol. Most likely," Thyra said. "We have to move." Ethan grabbed a small bag of supplies and turned to Thyra. "Where can we go? They'll have the entire settlement locked down." Thyra hesitated, then stood and placed the artifact back in her bag. "There is a cave system to the north. It's deep, hidden. We can stay there until they stop searching." Ethan nodded, his military instincts taking over. "All right. Wake the kids. We leave now." Sarah moved quickly, rousing her children and helping them gather their things. The boy and girl clung to their mother, their eyes wide with fear, but their movements quiet and disciplined. Ethan admired their resilience, even as he worried about the danger they were walking into. As they slipped out of the house and into the shadows, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that their problems were only beginning. The artifact, the children, Thyra's secrets, it was all a recipe for disaster. But for now, his focus was simple: survive. The distant hum of patrol drones echoed in the night, growing louder with each passing moment. Ethan led the way, his rifle in hand and his senses on high alert. The cave system wasn't far, but every step felt like an eternity. "We'll make it," Thyra whispered, as if sensing his doubt. Ethan glanced at her, then at the children following close behind. He nodded. "We have to." As the darkness of the cave swallowed them, Ethan couldn't help but wonder what he had just gotten himself into, and how far he was willing to go to see it through. The first betrayal. The cave was silent, save for the occasional drip of water echoing through the darkness. Ethan stood at the entrance, his rifle resting in his hands, his eyes scanning the rugged terrain outside. The galactic patrol drones had passed overhead a few hours ago, their searchlights sweeping the area, but they hadn't lingered long. Still, Ethan knew they wouldn't stop. Behind him, Thyra tended to her children. The small fire she had built cast flickering shadows on the walls, illuminating her pale blue skin and the faint glow of her children's faces. They huddled close to her, the fear in their eyes slowly giving way to exhaustion. "They'll find us eventually," Ethan said without turning around. His voice was calm but carried an edge of frustration. "Hiding won't work forever." Thyra didn't respond immediately. She placed a comforting hand on her daughter's head, smoothing her hair. "I know," she said quietly, "but we needed time to rest." Ethan turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Rest isn't going to save us, Thyra. We need a plan." Thyra met his gaze, her luminous eyes steady. "I'm open to suggestions." Before Ethan could reply, a faint noise outside caught his attention. He raised a hand, signaling for silence, and moved toward the entrance. The noise grew louder, a soft crunching of footsteps on gravel. Someone was approaching. Ethan's grip on his rifle tightened. He motioned for Xyra to stay back and crouched near the cave's edge, his eyes narrowing as he tried to make out the figure in the dim moonlight. A man emerged from the shadows, his features partially obscured by the hood of his coat. It was Marcus. Ethan's heart sank. He had hoped Marcus wouldn't follow through on his threats, but the man's presence here meant trouble. He stepped out of the cave, keeping his rifle low but ready. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" Marcus stopped a few feet away, his hands raised in a show of peace. "Relax, Ethan. I'm not here to cause trouble." Ethan didn't lower his guard. "Then why are you here?" Marcus hesitated, glancing over Ethan's shoulder toward the cave. "Look, I don't agree with what you're doing, but I also don't want to see anyone get hurt. The patrol's offering a reward for information on those aliens. Enough to set me up for life." Ethan's jaw clenched. "So, what? You're here to sell them out?" Marcus shook his head. "No, not yet. Anyway, I figured I'd give you a chance to walk away from this before it's too late. If you hand them over now, no one has to get hurt. You can go back to your quiet little life." Ethan laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the stillness. "You think I care about a quiet life? These people are running for their lives, Marcus. They're not a threat." "They're aliens, Ethan," Marcus said, his voice rising. "You can't trust them, and you can't protect them forever. The patrol will find them, and when they do, they'll take you down too." Ethan's eyes hardened. "Then I guess we're done talking." Marcus took a step forward, his expression darkening. "Don't be stupid, Ethan. You're going to get yourself killed for them." Ethan leveled his rifle. "Leave, Marcus." Now, for a moment, it seemed Marcus might back down, but then he smirked and took a slow step back. "All right, have it your way. But don't say I didn't warn you." He turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows. Ethan watched him go, his gut churning with unease. Something about the encounter didn't sit right. When he returned to the cave, Xyra was standing by the fire, her face pale. "Who was that?" she asked. "Marcus," Ethan said grimly. "He's a local, and he's trouble." Xyra's hands tightened into fists. "Did he see us?" "No," Ethan replied. "But he knows you're here. And I don't think he's going to keep that to himself for long." Xyra closed her eyes, her shoulders sagging. "Then we need to leave. Tonight." Ethan nodded. "Agreed. Pack what you can. We'll head deeper into the caves. There's an old tunnel system that might keep us hidden for a while." As they prepared to move, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus had already betrayed them. His instincts screamed that they were running out of time. The betrayal unfolds. Not long after they had moved deeper into the caves, the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Ethan froze, his heart pounding. He motioned for Xyra and the children to stay behind him. The footsteps grew louder, joined by the mechanical whirring of a patrol drone. The Galactic Patrol had arrived. Ethan's mind raced. They had moved carefully, leaving no obvious trail. How had the patrol found them so quickly? The answer hit him like a punch to the gut. "Marcus, stay quiet," Ethan whispered to Xyra. He turned off the flashlight and pressed himself against the wall, his rifle at the ready. A beam of light swept through the tunnel, illuminating the rocky walls. Voices followed, harsh and commanding. "We know you're in here. Surrender now, and we won't harm you." Xyra gripped Ethan's arm, her glowing eyes filled with fear. "They'll take the artifact," she whispered. "They'll take my children." Ethan glanced back at her, his expression fierce. "Not while I'm breathing." The patrol moved closer, their voices echoing louder. Ethan raised his rifle, his mind calculating their next move. He wasn't going to let Marcus's betrayal be the end of them. And so, the battle for survival began. Bonds of trust. The air in the hidden tunnels was damp and heavy, pressing down on Ethan's senses. The faint glow of Syra's skin was the only source of light as they moved deeper into the labyrinthine cave system. Behind them, the distant echoes of the Galactic Patrol's search parties lingered like a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Ethan glanced over his shoulder at Syra and her children. The boy and girl walked silently, their small hands gripping their mother's tattered cloak. Despite their exhaustion, their glowing eyes betrayed a quiet resilience that unsettled him. They were stronger than they looked, stronger than any child should be. "Are you sure this tunnel leads somewhere safe?" Ethan asked, his voice low but firm. Syra nodded. "It connects to a ravine outside the settlement. We can escape through there." Ethan wasn't convinced. The tunnels felt like a trap, too quiet, too isolated. If the patrol found them here, there would be no way out. Still, he kept those thoughts to himself. The last thing Syra needed was more doubt. They pressed on, the sound of their footsteps muffled by the uneven dirt floor. The children were eerily quiet, their movements smooth and deliberate. Ethan couldn't help but notice how in sync they were, like two halves of the same mind. It reminded him of something Syra had said earlier. They can sense things, emotions, intentions. He decided to test it. "You two doing okay back there?" he asked, his voice light, almost casual. The boy, Kalen, glanced up at him. "We're fine," he said softly, his voice almost too mature for his age. The girl, Lyra, nodded but didn't speak. Her glowing eyes lingered on Ethan for a moment longer than he liked, as if she were reading his thoughts. Ethan cleared his throat and turned back to the path ahead. "We'll stop soon," he said. "Get some rest." "We don't need rest," Kalen replied. "But you do." Ethan froze, his pulse quickening. He turned to face the boy. "What do you mean?" "You're tired," Kalen said simply. "You're worried. You don't trust us." The bluntness of the statement caught Ethan off guard. He glanced at Syra, who was watching him carefully. "It's he, reading my mind?" Ethan asked, his voice edged with unease. Syra shook her head. "Not your mind, just your feelings. It's part of who they are now." Ethan exhaled slowly, trying to mask his discomfort. "Well, that's good to know." A quiet moment. After another hour of walking, they reached a small cavern where the tunnel widened into a natural hollow. Syra suggested they rest, and even though Ethan was reluctant to stop, he agreed. The patrol's presence seemed to have faded for now, and they needed time to regroup. Ethan sat by the edge of the cavern, his rifle resting across his lap. Syra tended to her children, who sat cross-legged on the ground, their eyes closed as if meditating. The faint hum of the artifact in Syra's bag filled the silence, its rhythmic glow casting eerie patterns on the walls. "You're good with them," Ethan said, breaking the quiet. "The kids, I mean." Syra looked up, a faint smile playing on her lips. "They're all I have left." Ethan hesitated, then asked the question that had been nagging at him since they'd met. "What about their father? Is he gone?" Syra said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "He died protecting us." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. He didn't press further. He knew that kind of loss all too well. After a long pause, Syra spoke again. "You've lost someone too." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That obvious?" Syra nodded. "It's in your eyes. The way you carry yourself. You've been running from something, just like us." Ethan stared at her, the walls he built around his past threatening to crack. He looked away, his voice low. "I was a soldier. I did things I'm not proud of. Lost people I cared about. After the war, I wanted nothing to do with the galaxy or its problems. Thought I could just disappear. But you didn't. You helped us." Ethan let out a bitter laugh. "Yeah, well, I'm starting to think I'm not great at keeping my head down." Syra smiled, a small but genuine expression. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything." Ethan glanced at her, then quickly looked away. He wasn't used to gratitude. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this mess." A warning. As they rested, Kalen suddenly opened his eyes, his face tense. "They're coming." Ethan sprang to his feet, his rifle in hand. "How close?" Kalen pointed toward the tunnel they had come from. "Close enough. There are 5 of them. They're angry." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't doubt the boy's abilities, not after what he'd seen. "All right," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Zyra, get the kids ready to move. I'll buy us some time." Zyra stood, her expression conflicted. "You can't fight them alone." "I don't plan to," Ethan replied. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small device, a flash grenade. "I just need to slow them down." Zyra hesitated, then nodded. "Be careful." Ethan gave her a quick nod before slipping into the shadows near the tunnel entrance. He crouched low, his rifle trained on the path ahead. The faint sound of footsteps grew louder, accompanied by the metallic hum of a drone. As the first figure stepped into view, Ethan activated the flash grenade and tossed it forward. The explosion of light and sound filled the tunnel, disorienting the patrol. Ethan took advantage of the chaos, firing precise shots at the drone and the guards. "Go," he shouted over his shoulder. "I'll catch up." Zyra grabbed her children and ran, the artifact in her bag glowing brighter with every step. Ethan stayed behind, his focus on holding off the patrol. He didn't know how long he could keep this up, but one thing was clear: he wouldn't let them catch her. The galactic chase. The air was electric with tension as Kyra and her children raced through the narrow tunnels of the cave system. The rhythmic hum of the artifact in Zyra's bag grew louder with each step, as if it could sense the danger closing in on them. Ethan's warning echoed in her mind. "Go. I'll catch up." But every fiber of her being wanted to turn back. Kalen and Lyra kept pace beside her, their glowing eyes sharp and focused. They weren't just running. They were listening, sensing. Zyra could feel it. Their connection to the artifact was growing stronger. "Mother," Lyra said, her voice calm but urgent. "They're splitting up. 2 are coming from the left tunnel. 3 from behind." Zyra slowed, her chest tightening. "How do you know that?" "I just know," Lyra replied, glancing at her brother for confirmation. Callan nodded, his expression grim. Zyra knelt down, gripping their hands. "Stay close to me. We'll find a way through this." The ground beneath their feet rumbled faintly, a reminder that time was running out. Lyra's mind raced. The ravine wasn't far, but with patrols cutting off their escape routes, reaching it would be nearly impossible without Ethan's stand. Far behind them, Ethan crouched behind a jagged rock, his rifle aimed at the entrance of the tunnel. The flash grenade had bought him precious seconds, but the galactic patrol was relentless. He could hear their voices, sharp and commanding, as they regrouped. "Spread out," barked a voice, deep and authoritative. "The artifact is close. Do not let them escape." Ethan clenched his jaw. He knew their tactics: divide and conquer. The patrol captain was smart, but Ethan had spent years outsmarting people like him. He checked his ammunition. Not much left. He'd have to make every shot count. The first soldier came into view, scanning the area with a high-powered flashlight. Ethan waited, his finger steady on the trigger. As soon as the beam swept past him, he fired. The shot was clean, taking the soldier down without a sound. "Contact," another voice shouted. The rest of the squad moved in, their weapons raised. Ethan cursed under his breath. He fired again, this time aiming for the drone hovering above. The shot hit its mark, sending the machine crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. "Keep them busy, Ethan," he muttered to himself. "Just a little longer." The children's awakening. Back in the tunnels, Zyra and the children reached a fork in the path. The left tunnel was narrow and dark, while the right was wider but sloped upward, leading back toward the surface. "They're blocking the wider path," Kalen said, his voice steady. "We have to go left." Zyra hesitated. The left tunnel felt wrong, like it led deeper into danger. But she trusted her son's instincts. "All right, stay close." As they moved through the narrow passage, the hum of the artifact grew louder, resonating against the walls. The children's glowing eyes seemed brighter now, their movements more fluid and confident. Zyra noticed how their fear had given way to focus, as if the artifact was guiding them. "Mother," Lyra said, stopping abruptly. "I can feel them. The soldiers. They're afraid." "Afraid?" Zyra asked, startled. "Of what?" "Of us," Kalon replied, his voice tinged with something new, something resolute. "They know we're not normal." Before Zyra could respond, the tunnel ahead opened into a small cavern. A patrol soldier stood there, his weapon raised, but his hands trembled. His eyes darted between Zyra and the children, wide with fear. "Don't move," the soldier barked, his voice cracking. "I'll shoot." Kalon stepped forward, his small frame calm and unthreatening. "You don't want to hurt us," he said, his tone almost hypnotic. "You want to leave." The soldier's hands shook harder. I. "You're scared," Lyra added, her voice soft but firm. "You don't need to be." The soldier's weapon lowered, his eyes glassy. He took a step back, then another, before turning and fleeing down the tunnel without another word. Zyra stared at her children, her heart pounding. "What did you do?" Kalon and Lyra exchanged a glance. "We didn't hurt him," Kalon said. "We just showed him." "Showed him what?" Lyra pressed. "The truth," Lyra said simply. "That we're not his enemy." The chase narrows. Ethan stumbled into the cavern moments later, his face smeared with dirt and sweat. "Move," he barked, waving them forward. "More are coming. We need to get out of here now." Zyra didn't ask questions. She grabbed her children's hands and followed Ethan toward the faint light at the end of the tunnel. The ravine was close, so close she could feel the cool night air seeping through the cracks in the rocks. But as they neared the exit, a figure stepped into their path. The patrol captain. He was tall and imposing, his armor gleaming under the faint moonlight. In his hand was a plasma rifle, its barrel glowing ominously. "You've caused quite the mess," the captain said, his voice cold and measured. "But it ends here." Ethan stepped in front of Zyra and the children, his rifle raised. "You're outnumbered," he said, his tone sharp. "Walk away while you can." The captain smirked. "Outnumbered? You're a former soldier with a broken rifle. She's a fugitive scientist. And those kids..." He glanced at Kalon and Lyra, his smirk faltering. "They're not normal, are they?" "They're more than you'll ever understand," Ethan said. The captain raised his weapon. "Then I guess I'll have to see for myself." Before he could fire, the artifact in Zyra's bag pulsed brightly, sending a wave of energy rippling through the cavern. The captain froze, his weapon slipping from his hands. His eyes widened in shock as he stumbled back. What is this?" he stammered. Kalon and Lyra stepped forward, their glowing eyes locked on the captain. Their voices rang out in unison, calm but powerful. "Leave us, or face the truth." The captain's face twisted in terror. He turned and ran, his footsteps echoing down the tunnel. Ethan stared at the children, then at Zyra. "What just happened?" Zyra shook her head, her voice trembling. "They're evolving. The artifact, it's changing them." Ethan didn't have time to process her words. He motioned toward the ravine. "We'll deal with it later. Right now, we need to move." Together, they stepped into the cool night air, the stars above lighting their path. The patrol was still out there, but for now, they had survived. And Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only beginning. Sacrifice and hope. The cool night air outside the ravine felt like a brief reprieve, but Ethan knew it wouldn't last. The Galactic Patrol was still out there, regrouping, tracking. The artifact's pulse had disrupted their immediate pursuit, but it was only a matter of time before they closed in again. Ethan scanned the landscape. The ravine led to a dense forest on the horizon, its towering trees offering the cover they desperately needed. "We head to the forest," he said, his voice calm but firm. "We'll have better chances of hiding there." Zaira nodded, clutching the artifact tightly to her chest. Callan and Lyra walked beside her, their glowing eyes scanning the area with a sharpness Ethan couldn't ignore. He had no doubt now. They weren't ordinary children. The artifact had transformed them into something extraordinary, something dangerous. As they made their way toward the forest, Ethan's thoughts were heavy. He glanced at Zaira, who walked with a quiet determination despite her visible exhaustion. "You need to tell me," he said quietly, his tone low enough that the children wouldn't hear. "What happens if they get the artifact?" Zaira hesitated, her fingers tightening around the bag. "If they take it, they'll use it to create weapons, biological weapons. They'll erase entire species, reshape planets to their will. My people, we created this to heal, to protect. But in the wrong hands." She trailed off, her expression grim. Ethan exhaled slowly. "And your children? What's happening to them?" Zaira's gaze softened as she looked at Callan and Lyra. "The artifact is bonding with them. It's amplifying their minds, their bodies. They're becoming something new, something that could stand against the Galactic Authority if they survive the process." Ethan stopped in his tracks, his jaw tightening. "If they survive." Zaira met his gaze, her voice trembling. "The artifact wasn't designed for this. It wasn't meant to bond with living beings. I don't know what's happening to them, or how much more they can take." Ethan's stomach sank. He had seen what war and desperation could do to people, but this was different. This was a mother willing to risk everything to protect her children, even as they became something she couldn't fully understand. The final confrontation. They reached the edge of the forest just as the first patrol ship appeared in the sky, its searchlights sweeping the ground like glowing fingers. The distant hum of engines grew louder, accompanied by the metallic clatter of approaching soldiers. "We're out of time," Ethan said, his grip tightening on his rifle. He turned to Zaira. "Take the kids and run. I'll hold them off." Zaira's eyes widened. "No, you can't fight them alone." Ethan smiled faintly, the weariness in his face replaced by something resolute. "I've been fighting alone for a long time. This isn't any different." Before Zaira could protest, Callan stepped forward. "We'll help," he said, his voice steady. "No," Ethan said firmly. "You're just kids." Callan's glowing eyes met his, unflinching. "We're not just kids anymore." Lyra stepped beside her brother, her voice soft but unwavering. "We can feel their fear. We can make them stop." Zaira knelt down, her hands trembling as she cupped her children's faces. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice breaking. "This could hurt you." It cold. "We're sure," Callan said. "We have to try." Ethan watched, his chest tightening. He didn't understand exactly what they were capable of, but he knew one thing. They were braver than most soldiers he had ever known. A sacrifice. The patrol emerged from the ravine, their rifles raised, their movements calculated. The captain stepped forward, his voice echoing through the forest. "Surrender the artifact, and we'll let you live. Resist, and you all die." Ethan stepped into view, his rifle aimed directly at the captain. "You've got a funny way of asking for cooperation," he said, his voice laced with defiance. The captain smirked. One man against an entire squad. Brave, but foolish. Ethan's eyes flicked to the children, who stood behind him with Zaira. Callan and Lyra closed their eyes, their hands clasped tightly together. The hum of the artifact grew louder, its glow intensifying. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," Ethan said, taking a step forward. "And you never will." Before the captain could respond, the artifact unleashed a wave of energy that rippled through the forest. The soldiers stumbled, their weapons falling from their hands as a palpable wave of fear and confusion washed over them. Kalon and Lyra stepped forward, their glowing eyes locking onto the captain. "Leave," they said in unison, their voices reverberating with an otherworldly power. "You do not belong here." The captain's face twisted in terror. He dropped his weapon and turned to flee, his squad following in a chaotic scramble. The patrol ship overhead veered away, as if repelled by an unseen force. As the soldiers disappeared into the distance, the children collapsed to the ground, their small bodies trembling. Thyra rushed to their side, her hands shaking as she checked their pulses. "They're alive," she whispered, relief flooding her voice. "But they're weak." Ethan knelt beside her, his rifle forgotten. "They saved us," he said, his voice soft. "But for how long?" Hope for the future. As dawn broke over the forest, Ethan helped Thyra and the children find a secluded clearing. The patrol was gone for now, but they all knew it was only a matter of time before the Galactic Authority regrouped. Thyra turned to Ethan, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "You don't have to stay with us," she said. "You've already done more than I could ever ask." Ethan shook his head. "I'm not leaving. Not until you're safe." Thyra's lips trembled, but she nodded. "Thank you." Kalon and Lyra stirred, their glowing eyes opening slowly. Kalon looked at Ethan, his voice weak but certain. "You're part of this now." Ethan smiled faintly. "Yeah, kid. I guess I am." The artifact pulsed softly in Thyra's bag, its glow steady and calm. It wasn't just a weapon. It was a symbol of hope, a chance for something better. And for the first time in years, Ethan felt like he had a purpose again. As they prepared to move deeper into the forest, Ethan glanced at the horizon. The fight wasn't over, but for now, they had hope, and that was enough.